Well, greetings and welcome to Exponential Next Future of Multiplication series. These are 7 conversations that we're having that are reshaping the church of tomorrow today. And my name is Bill Kokenauer. I serve as the Director of Deployment for Exponential, which means I get to provide strategic and operational oversight for our exponential learning communities, as well as some other R&D and educational opportunities. And I am pleased to be here with my co-host, Carrie Williams, the Executive Director of Next. Welcome, Carrie.
Thanks, Bill. Hi, guys. Welcome. I'm so glad that you can join us in today's conversation. I think specifically this episode is one that is a hot topic, I would call it. It should be one that we are all considering in some form or fashion in our own context. And so I'm really delighted with the folks that we have chosen to be a part of this conversation. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but we have Michael and Mark with us today, both friends of Exponential, and we just absolutely love the work that they're doing and the spaces that they're doing it in. And so if you guys would introduce yourself, Mark, tell us a little bit about yourself first, and then you, Michael.
Yeah, sure. My name is Mark Lutz. I live outside of Pittsburgh, PA. I have a wife. We celebrate 11 years tomorrow, as of this recording on August the 2nd. And which is she's awesome, and we love the community and the space that we live. I have an undergraduate degree in youth ministry, a master's in ministry leadership. I served at a local church outside of Pittsburgh in a little tiny town that we still live in for 11 years, 6 years as a youth pastor, 5 years as the pastor of discipleship, overseeing discipleship, assimilation, and care. And for the past 3 years, my wife and I have had the pleasure of starting and leading an entirely online church based mostly in the online gaming community called Lux Digital Church. And so we've had the chance to pioneer and do something fresh and new inside the church space digitally.
Yeah, I am Michael Uzdavines, and I am the metaverse pastor for Cornerstone Church. And Cornerstone Church is out in Yuba City, California, led by Pastor Jason Poling. I don't live in California. I live in Florida. I'm down here near Fort Lauderdale. And our ministry is mainly focused on the VR communities, although not exclusively. So we have 2 campuses at the moment, one in Horizon Worlds and one in VR Chat. Those have been going, VR Chat's been going for over 3 years, Horizon Worlds over a year. And we treat them like campuses. And so we do church every Sunday in VR, full service, live preaching, worship, the whole 9 yards. And so that is the ministry that I oversee for Cornerstone Church. I come out of traditional ministry I was the associate pastor. I was the operations pastor at a church here in Florida. But my background, I have kind of a few things that I've done over my life, but one of them is make video games. And so my programming background and my ability to build worlds was what kind of brought me and Pastor Jason together to be able to not just be in these places, but actually build the worlds for churches. And so that's kind of how I ended up in this strange but awesome place of metaverse ministry.
It's good to have you guys here. In fact, Michael, go ahead and talk a little bit more about your origin story and how that led to what you're doing now.
Yeah. So my origin story goes back a ways. I actually my first career, and I still am as an attorney. So I just went to law school, became an attorney, ran my own firm with my wife, who I've been married to for 20 years. We've got 4 kids, and we had our firm together for many years. In 2011, I felt called to ministry. I didn't know what that looked like. Honestly, what I thought it was going to be making video games. I fancied myself the C.S. Lewis of video games, and all these people were going to play video games and come to Christ, and through all these fantastical worlds I was going to build. And it wasn't really quite that. But what I didn't realize at the time was that God was sort of putting me in the position to where He needed me to be. And so started learning this piece of software called Unity, which was relatively new at the time, and allowed a guy like me to build these 3D games. And it ended up going nowhere. I've had a lot of fun doing it, but nothing really materialized. And I thought, well, I guess that's not it. I guess traditional ministry is it. I went and got my MDiv, entered ministry, and it was great. I loved what I was doing. But then all of a sudden during COVID, everybody was trying to figure out how to do ministry online, or at least how to leverage that because of the necessity and, mixing digital and physical and all of that. And so at that point, these VR ministries really started to flourish. And so it was at a conference that my former church was at, and Pastor Jason was at, a digital conference. We were all online because it was COVID. And I found out that Pastor Jason had started this VR ministry. I thought it was fascinating. I had just started to dabble into programming for VR. I thought maybe I'd make a VR game. And as we started talking, he basically said, what he's really looking for, because he had the physical church to still deal with. He said, what I'm looking for is a pastor who knows how to make video games. And I was like, well, that's oddly specific to where I'm at in life. And as we talked, he and my lead pastor at the time and myself, we all talked and realized, God's moving in this direction. This is just too perfect. And so that's how that transition happened from my old church to the new one. And so it's been amazing. There's been this combination of pastoring and push, which is, pastoring the people that we've got it for all intents and purposes. It's a congregation, just like you would have physically. But then also there's all these opportunities to build and push into places that sorely need the gospel and people. And I know Mark's going to talk quite a bit about this as well in the gaming community, but places where there are people who aren't really necessarily going to wake up on a Sunday and decide they're going to drive to church, but they will go into a VR room and they will play a game or do a lot of other things. And so in the digital space. And so that's kind of how that happened. So that's how the origin story kind of ended up into where I'm at.
But just real quickly, explain who Pastor Jason is.
Yeah, so Pastor Jason is Jason Poling. He's the lead pastor of Cornerstone Church. Absolutely amazing lead pastor, amazing heart for people, but also really just an amazing, had a vision for what this technology could do. And all the credit to Pastor Jason and Cornerstone Church, because Cornerstone Church is, for all intents and purposes, a relatively traditional church. It's not a mega church. It's a church that's been in Yuba City since I think like the 1950s. And whenever I travel out to Yuba to meet everybody or to preach, invariably I will get somebody that comes up to me. Usually, few years on in life, and they will say, I don't understand what you guys are doing, but I love it. And so he really just had this, this thought, hey, this VR is here. Can we advance the gospel in this place? And that's really kind of how he would describe, like, the faith step that he took. And God blessed it. And I think it's, it's remarkable that God is using Cornerstone Church to in this very, very like tip of the spear kind of way. Because it isn't what you would probably draw up as the church to be doing it, but they're behind it. The people are for it, and God's been blessing it.
Yeah. And it's kind of cool that NBC, from an online summit that we did, NBC picked up and did a very favorable story about that.
About Jason and the church. Yeah. And Jason Poling was probably one of our first next venture projects that we ever had at our Shark Tank events. Mark is also one of those folks who have journeyed through Shark Tank and kind of was introduced to us through a referral process and an application process, narrowed it down to 12 different project leaders with different innovative ministries that we brought into the conversation to a Shark Tank event and distributed grants to, and just started building relationships with. And so I love that it's kind of a full circle moment with you, Michael, and the work that Jason has done and our relationship with him. And then, of course, with Mark.
And Mark, you want to share a little bit of kind of your background and what led you to what you're doing right now?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I mean, so I think it's important to point out that in my life, I grew up in the church. I've known Jesus since a young age, felt called into ministry in high school, I have all of the things, right? All of the boxes that should be checked for the guy who's, wants to go work in the church and cut my teeth in the youth ministry circle and stuff. But the most consistent thing in my life, in terms of what I've done with my life outside of the church, has been gaming. And so just have a burden and a passion for it. And the gaming world in church world, specifically pastoral ministry, don't really go hand to hand all that well. You're kind of viewed as just being a bad pastor, and so, it's like, well, just you're not reading enough of the Bible. So that's why you're playing video games late at night. You're not up at 3:30 in the morning so you can do P90X twice before you start reading your Bible and things. And so I very much so felt that burden of like, just the drive and really just having every aspect of your life being just on point. We spent a lot of time. There's no shade at all. We spent a lot of time at Catalyst conferences, which really drives that point home pretty strongly, and love them, super inspired by them. But and so I really carried that on my back until 2019, and I had a very distinct prayer. I literally sat down to start a podcast one day. I was frustrated and bored in my job, and I really, God had moved something in my heart, and I wasn't listening. And I had a simple prayer, said, God, redeem my love for gaming, or I have to get rid of it. And so I sat down, recorded a podcast episode talking about an obscure card game that not even a lot of people were playing, less people were watching, and I just started using that as an opportunity and outlet for ministry. I won't get too deep into it, but basically God began working through that community in some really unique and powerful ways. Pretty soon I was discipling more people online I'd never met and likely would never meet in person than I was at my physical church that I had worked at for nearly a decade. And God was answering prayers in some pretty miraculous ways. And that was pre-pandemic. And so God really started in our heart. I went through a lot of really frustrating moments of feeling like it was sacrilegious to plant an online church. I think it's important, especially if you're in a physical church, for you to hear that, like, those of us who are in digital ministry have really wrestled with this theologically as well. Like, we didn't just jump into it because it was the new hot thing. Like, most of us in this space really had to work through the Bible, the scriptures, and our time with the Spirit of God in order to come to the point that we felt like this wasn't just us telling us to do something. And it took me 3 or 4 months of very consistently wrestling with the Lord in prayer before I surrendered and began. We weren't even doing it. It was just like I allowed myself to dream. It took me 9 more months to pull the trigger and decide to do it. It wasn't, we had the pandemic. It wasn't until August that I reached out to Stadia Church Planting and asked them if they would take me, basically. And it wasn't until 2021 in March before we launched. And so, my heart breaks for the gaming community, and in many ways because it's so massive and so lost. I was looking during the pandemic at the church, desperately trying to figure out how to crack the code on engagement. No one will say anything in our chats, and at the same time, I am watching people who are literally reeling in $15,000, $20,000, $40,000 before they even start playing a video game, and just sitting there talking with people, and people are donating money to them. And I'm watching people, broadcast their worldview to 50, 60, 70, 80, at the peak, some of them 150, 120,000 people, 40 hours a week, impacting the emerging generations in ways that no pastor in the world was. And I said that the church has to have a voice in this space. And the gaming industry was so massive that it was supporting all kinds of work. And I was like, certainly it can support a church as well. So I saw something that was fiscally responsible. It wasn't just, a shot in the dark. It wasn't just a missions thing for us. It was, no, I feel like we can exhibit full ecclesiology, at least in my view of it, as a church in this space, and we can do that really well, and we can connect with people deeply, we can disciple them deeply. And so it was never about a broadcast opportunity for us. It was always, from the get-go, it was deeply relational. It was always discipleship focused. It was always relationship first. And so that's the 10,000-foot view of how God really stirred in our hearts to get Lux off the ground.
So good. I get excited listening to you guys, and just the amount of imagination and risk taking and curiosity and what feels like innovation to probably the majority of people listening. It stirs some affection towards the Lord in me to think differently, even in my own context. So thank you for what you're doing. Let me just state that before I move forward. But I want to hear, Mark, you mentioned disciple making, right? As your focus. Um, I know that we have people listening who have a big question mark around how in the world are you, having church, doing church, being church in digital spaces. And, there's lots of questions around it. Some folks may have done a dive into this to trying to understand it better. Some might be hearing this for the very first time. So I'd love for each of you to share when we say digital church, that you have a digital church, that you are a digital church pastor. Help them understand what church means in your context. What does church look like in your spaces, in the gaming world, in the meta world. Michael, why don't you share with us first? What's that look like? What does that mean?
Yeah. In one sense, we're still trying to figure that out, if I'm honest. I mean, we talk about it often. Pastor Jason and I just had, I was just out in Yuba this past, just about a month ago. And we had probably a 2.5 hour conversation, like we will have from time to time, besides the normal kind of routine, check in on how the ministry is going, on just what we're seeing, what is the thing that we're doing. And from the start, in our context, in VR, it has been pretty slippery to define exactly what it is, because we come in there and we do a full church service. If you saw our service, it would look like probably 90% of the church services that you would see if you were to walk into any church right now. We do announcements, we have worship. I mean, it's our service order matches what we know, or what we do, at least in the Western
People show
church.
up in their avatar, right? Like they come walking in their avatars. Is that
They
correct?
do.
Yeah.
They do. And so because it's avatars, because each individual person there is controlling their own avatar, and very, very quickly when you're in VR, you forget you're in VR. And it doesn't matter that you're talking to Hulk Hogan and Tony the Tiger. You feel like you're there. And so so because of all of that, because of the way that we have, we have like decided to present God's word in that way, people attend. And for some people, they have no local church. And so for some people, I'm the only pastoral voice in their life. Others will show up having gone to church in the morning, and then they come in there and they want more church. And they're a part of our community, but they also have a local church that they're connected to. And then we've got plenty of people that just show up and they're not a Christian at all. And they have questions and they want to talk and they want to dialogue about, their worldview. And that's kind of like the group that we get in there. And so when we look at that, it's like, okay, for that first group, we're a church. Like we've got, in our opinion, all of the sacraments that you would need. And just because we aren't, we can't reach out and touch each other. There's a point that we make, which is like, yeah, but we are still together in spirit. We go to I point to the faith of the Roman centurion who said to Jesus, you don't have to come. I know you can heal this man. And when somebody asks me for prayer in VR, they're exhibiting the faith of the Roman centurion, saying it doesn't matter that we're not present. I know Jesus can answer this prayer. So in one sense, for that, we look at it as a church. For the people who are the non-believers that are coming in and just want to talk and want to press against us or engage in apologetics or yell at us and curse at us and whatever, all of that, it's missions. It is pure missions. And so we have wrestled with this quite a bit. And we've gone we've gone from one stage of being super adamant that it is a church, it's a campus, and that's it. And I will tell you right now that we're a few years in, we are backing off of that just a little bit, because and this was always our core tenet of our metaverse ministry, was still to try to get, to the extent we could, people connected locally. There was still always that idea that, hey, look, we're not trying to gather all of these people for Cornerstone Church. We want to gather people into Jesus and then see where he leads them. And if this is the only expression that they can have, we're here for you. But if you can get connected with a local church, you should go. And where we're at right now is the push, the focus for us is kind of two ways. If someone's not connected to a local church and we can connect them, then the discipleship process is to get them to see the value of that. And one of two things happens, and I've seen this, when someone realizes that they need that in-person, that they need that in-person connection. Some people realize they shouldn't be in VR at all, because VR, the metaverse, the internet, all of it, as we all know, it can be a very, very dark place. And so some people are coming out of deep, deep darkness, finding Christ and realizing they need to be out of VR altogether. And I've seen it happen. And with tears, but laughter, we send them off, laughter of joy. And, because it's like, we're going to miss you because we love you dearly, but good choice. You need to not be here. Others will get connected and then come back. And they will say, yeah, I'm connected with my local church, but I still want to be here. At that point, we consider them not necessarily part of our church, but fellow missionaries. And we've started to really make more of a push on sort of highlighting the fact that we are in fact missionaries in this space. And in fact, my role at Cornerstone is dual. I am both considered pastor, but also I report to the missions board. So I am both missionary and pastor. And I love that because that highlights the kind of duality of what we're talking about. So functionally, if you came into one of our services, it would look like just a normal church service. I mean, I say normal, it's VR, but it would look like a normal church service. But what's happening kind of under the hood with the different people there, in the many people that might show up, you might have a group of Muslims who want to engage in apologetics. You might have some seasoned Christians who are there just because they can't get enough of the word and they want to talk to the Muslims after the service. Then you've got baby Christians. Then you've got some, we get a lot of de-churched people, who left the church because of some hurt. And they said, I hear this more than, I won't say often, but it's enough that it's not surprising anymore, where somebody says, I promised myself I would never go back to a church after what that church did to me, but I decided to give this a shot. And what we're able to do is to point them not to a church, but to Jesus. Mm-hmm. So like all of that's happening. And what we're trying to do is figure out the question that you asked is, what is all of this?
Yeah.
I don't have a specific definition that I'm ready to plant my flag on, but I know it's good and I know God is working, which is why we keep going.
That's great. And so would you say there are definitely church service times where people know that they can show up to attend? And then is there anything beyond that you do in the metaverse as far as like small group gatherings or online? I'll be honest, I've not been in the metaverse, so I have no idea what it's like. And so are there like chat rooms or other spaces and places where you're meeting, having more conversation, disciple making, those kinds of things?
Yeah, 100%. I'll be brief and let Mark go, but we've got a women's ministry going that's flourishing. We've had small groups from time to time. Those kind of come and go as they do IRL as well. But absolutely, we do small groups midweek. We've got one of the directors of our campus. So we've got a director of our campus for Horizon Worlds. He's developed his own discipleship plan for Christians, but we're calling it 101 and 102 because what we see is that there are Jesus loving Christians that don't have a solid, their theology is a little bit skewed. Because we get a lot of people from a lot of different traditions.
So online. It's so true.
Right.
So true.
So, in one conversation, you could have everybody saying like, "Hey, I am saved by Jesus. He saved me of my sins. He's God in the flesh." And we're like, "Okay, great. Like that's a great profession." But then be like, "Yeah, but I don't know about the Trinity. Like, I'm not sure about all that." And it's like, is the Bible really inerrant? And is it? And so you can get a lot of these kind of questions. And so from a systematic theology standpoint, our director has developed this pipeline of a 101 and 102 that just basically walks people through these cohorts. And he's been amazing at doing that. We can talk about the volunteers that we have, as we go, but I can't say enough good things about the people that make up this ministry. It's all the volunteers. We call them the dream team, which I think lots of churches are doing now, but which is fine. But yeah, so from a discipleship standpoint, Carrie, to answer your question, we also have lots of the things that a physical church would have: small groups, like I said, women's, men, one-on-one, one-on-two discipleship, these different cohorts. All of it's possible through Discord is a big thing for us, and then lots of times we just hop into VR and do it. We do the discipleship using our avatars.
Very cool. Thank you, Michael. All right, Mark. Tell it before you get started, just on your own context of what, church planting in a digital space looks like. First, I know that you probably have this statistic. How many people are spending time in the spaces and places that you have planted a church, and what's the average range of age?
Oh, geez. So, I mean, the numbers have gone up. So our sanctuary is on Twitch. The rest of our church is on Discord. So if you're just looking for a percentage, it's like an iceberg, right? 20% of our church is on Twitch. 80% of our church is in Discord. And so our church service is on Twitch. The rest is somewhere else. Twitch itself was seeing 100 million viewers a month prior to COVID. And so it's grown quite a bit. And honestly, I don't keep up to date with all of Twitch's stats all the time. And there's a lot of people who are pulled off to new platforms every now and then they come back. So the numbers tend to fluctuate. But in terms of like the gaming industry is roughly $390 billion a year. It's roughly 3.5 to 4 times the size of the movie industry. So if you think that Disney's had an impact on the worldview of the people in your church, well, then the world is roughly being impacted 4 times as much by the gaming industry in terms of economy, at least. The average 15-year-old, 98% of 15-year-old and younger identify as a gamer. And there's roughly 3.02 billion they would self-identify as a gamer on the planet. Roughly 1 billion more gamers than there are Christians on the planet. And I mean, those are old numbers, not even current. And it's growing. It's not becoming smaller. And so the scope of the mission, and then someone will say, well, you don't know how many of those gamers are Christians. I'm like, yeah, you are correct. But if you spend 15 minutes on Twitch with me, I can pretty much show you if many of them are Christians, most of them aren't living like it. And so if you're looking for debauchery, you can go to Twitch, but you can also go to VR chat, to be entirely fair. Michael's in the wild freaking West out there. It is the craziest places I've ever been in VR chat. Oh my gosh. So, I think that there's all this conversation around, is it a church? Isn't it a church? And so people are like, are you a missions organization? Are you a church? I'm because I'm an Enneagram 8, I'm just whatever you want, you can decide. I don't care. Because to me, right, if you are a missions organization that's not starting churches, you're a bad missions organization because you're just converting and then abandoning. And if you are a church that doesn't view yourself as a mission, then you're not a church because the church has a mission. And so the answer to that question is yes. It's the chicken and the egg for me. I cannot separate the idea of a missions organization and a church. I guess maybe to the federal government, they're different, but to me, in the Lord's eyes, they don't have that many, differences between the two. And I think that has really come from sort of the Western superiority mindset that says we have churches here and then we send missionaries to Africa. And that's what it means, instead of really this bent of that everybody is a missionary and everybody has a missional lifestyle and every church is a mission. And so for me, Lux is both of those things. But we've been very clear about the fact that we identify ourselves as a church. And although we believe that fully digital lifestyles are unhealthy for people and people need physical relationships around them, community, connection, deep relationships around them, we do not believe that, biblically at least, it's necessary for that to be a local fellowship as in a church. We believe that you can experience the fullness of what it means to be part of the church in an entirely digital context. And if you would picture the difference between playing Super Mario on N64 and then playing Super Mario on the original Nintendo system, is sort of the difference in worlds between Michael's world and mine, right? Where he's jumping into something three-dimensional. My world is very two-dimensional. And so we have a live stream on Wednesday nights. We have about an hour and a half long service. And that is, maybe people are like, well, it's online. It's just got to be like TikTok length. And that isn't the case. People actually have the ability to pay attention for long periods of time. If you're actually doing something they want to pay attention to for a long period of time, it's just most churches are alienating their digital audience by putting a camera in the back of the room and treating them like they're second-class citizens. And so therefore, yes, it's going to be hard to engage them over a long period of time. And so for us, we have that, like we have our Wednesday night service. It has preaching, it has teaching. It looks very different than what you would see in a normal church, because the first 15 minutes is usually like me and my wife sitting on a couch, just welcoming people, and laughter and humor is a huge part of the DNA of our church family. We don't do all the typical sermons. We have typical sermons, monologues, but we don't believe that people learn just that way. I think that's true in physical space as well. So we do something called Sermons 3 Ways, which is currently like 8 ways. But we find all sorts of different ways to do sermons. So every one of our series ends in a live Q&A, where me and some of our pastoral staff will just be on screen answering questions that have come in and questions that are coming in live in chat. When I teach monologues, I'm reading chat and answering questions. We have post-service opportunities where we just literally hang out after we're done with the sermon and the worship. And then, we're engaging and answering questions that came in. Our worship team looks different. Like we sometimes have someone here who's live. Sometimes we have Pastor Andy from Tampa who's live from there. He has a worship team that's spread all across the world. He literally sends them click tracks and they record their vocals and their guitar tracks and their bass tracks and their drum tracks separately. And then he mixes them together, puts them all on a screen. And then we do these pre-recorded worship pieces that our whole church worships to. So we have a worship band, and we'll have someone from San Diego, someone from Pittsburgh, someone from Tampa, somebody from Guam, someone from the middle of nowhere in the Midwest, who are all on the screen, who have all poured in their time and energy and resources and giftedness in order to help our church step into a place of worship. And then after church every single week, we go over to Discord and we're in voice chat rooms playing games. And we call it our post service. This Wednesday, I went to sleep at 1:30 in the morning, but we still had 2 groups hanging out at 1:30 a.m. And so, and then from there, we have small groups and, Bible studies. We have teams and team meetings and leadership development. And, after service, we have prayer rooms and we have a welcome center and a chance to meet the pastor and a chance to just hang out and listen to music and like all the things that you would do in church. We're doing them online and functionally a little bit different. We say a lot of times at Lux, I think it was Andy Stanley's church, where kind of like the motto was like, we're creating a church that unchurched people love to go to, right? And that was their thing. And we've taken a little bit of that like on ourselves, because I've loved Andy and his teaching. And once again, like I've listened to him a lot at Catalyst conferences. We say we're a church. We're a church for people that would rather go to hell than go to church. We just encounter a lot of people who, if you gave them the option and said, listen, you're going to die tomorrow and you're going to go to hell unless you go back to church tonight, they would say, I'll risk hell. Church is living hell for me. So I'll risk that you're wrong, and I'll risk hell over going to church. And so we created our church for people who are in that mindset. And we find them quite often, as it turns out. There's a lot of people out there that would rather go to hell than go to church.
We love what you guys are doing. And Mark, something you said about everybody being a missionary, man, as we begin to, eliminate that sort of artificial divide between the professional clergy and laity, I do believe we need full-time vocational pastors, but we need to eliminate that divide. And that, when you live in the mission, like what you're talking about there, we're going to see new expressions of the church everywhere. In fact, the question I have is kind of related to that. Anybody that's familiar with exponential knows that we really press in to multiplication. Like we're definitely for addition, healthy things grow. We're not big fans of transfer growth, but we think that the singular focus on addition has take us away from multiplication. So we think about sending and releasing and the disciple making and discipling people into starting other expressions of the church. So as you think about kind of multiplication in that sense, Talk a little bit about what do you see the role of church planting in the digital space relative to multiplication, and what would you say to leaders that are considering a digital strategy as part of how they're reaching the world?
Yeah, when it comes to digital, I think that there's these two groups, right? There's these sort of like crazy sort of pioneering-esque individuals who are trying to do these really digitally exclusive things because they recognize that people connect deeply online, and there are demographics of people that are never going to connect in our physical churches, or very unlikely to. And then there's also like the whole rest of the church world who's like, we know that this is important and we have no idea what we're supposed to do with it. And so why is this important from a multiplication standpoint? For me, you're going to have a really hard time multiplying in the emerging generations if you do not change your view of digital. I have a handful, maybe there's like 4 or 5 different sort of ideological and thought shifts that I talk about a lot with pastors, that they have to change the way they think about online. So I'll give you one of them. We are me, and really anybody older than me, we are hybrid and dualistic. In other words, we are digital and physical beings. This call is digital. It doesn't not exist and doesn't not count just because it's online, right? So we are hybrid, and we're constantly merging between those worlds, but we're dualistic, which means we split them between one another, right? I have online friends and real life friends. I remember when the internet came up and I recreated myself using my MySpace profile. I remember recreating a version of myself through AOL Instant Messenger. My brain was old enough to create a split and then section it off, right? And the internet has impacted generationally brains differently. So the more formed your brain was and the less plastic it was when you experienced the emergence of the internet, the more you use the internet as a tool, the more it has functionality, right? And the younger you are when the internet emerged, the more you tend to experience identity through it. And so for me, I experienced identity through online space growing up, unlike my parents who experienced it as a replacement for encyclopedias and a replacement for getting information and a replacement for maps, for example. Certainly it's a tool for me as well, but I learned how to live in that space. The emerging generations that have never known a world without the internet, it's like air for them, right? It's a force of nature. If the various elemental forces of our world, the internet would be one of them for my daughters who are 7 and 4. So the YouTube algorithm learns them as they learned themselves. And so if I am hybrid but dualistic, they are hybrid but holistic, meaning their two pieces cannot be separated from one another. The emerging generations walk seamlessly between those two worlds. And because of that, their relationships are seamless. They don't have online friends and physical friends. They may recognize that they only know some through the internet, but they just have friends, and those relationships are meaningful to them. And that is the place that they're primarily right now formed, because we do not right now, if we have a problem, go to somebody to answer that problem. We first go to digital spaces to find answers to the problems that we're facing, and most importantly, support when we need it. And so if the emerging generations are doing that and the church continues to be hybrid but dualistic, only shipping our story out, only using it as a tool, only using it as a place to get information or send information, then we will miss the opportunity to continue to multiply in the emerging generations. We will become increasingly less relevant to them. And the reason for that is because we will be speaking to increasingly less and less and less and less of their lives. Their experience and our presentation of the gospel and discipleship will be less relevant because we have no idea how to apply it to an increasingly large segment of their existence. And so it's imperative that churches make this shift in their ideology and in their mindset from the internet is a tool and a thing that we do and it's not real, to this is a place that people live and we have to learn how to be hybrid and holistic rather than hybrid and dualistic in our thinking about it.
Yeah, I'm listening to you, Mark, and all I can think about is the number of people who are listening just thinking, what? Like there's no way, like the church should fight for in-person community, stay off your phones, all the things, right? So like my age and up, I'm not going to mention my age, but I'm older than you, Mark. And so I can't help but think like the generations before me who lived without internet entirely, and when it came on the scene, what a difference it made in their perspective of approaching the next generation, and probably the same wrestle and the same fight, right? And so I want to say this because while the way that digital is part of our world, I mean, it's not going away, right? It's not going to go away. And so the way that it's part of our world now, um, very much is how, back in the day, getting dressed up and going to a church service on Sunday morning and wearing your finest, and showing up for a service was part of the daily routine, right? I mean, if you rewind 100 years ago in the United States of America, the majority were churchgoers. It was part of what you did, whether you were a Christian or not actually following Jesus. It's what you did in tradition's sake. And so, I don't want to see the next generations of church planters not risking entering into a digital space because they don't understand it. This is an area where, while, I'm not an expert, but, we have, next year in 2025 at Exponential Next, we're going to have a focused area on digital church planting. And Mark will lead that area for us because I think it's an important conversation we all need to engage in. And while we might not be experts, we can get people around us who help us better understand and help us interact and not be afraid or frightened or scared or hold it at arm's length. And so I just want to say that, like, if you're listening and you're having a hard time swallowing some of the things that we're talking about, the reality is the majority of the world has a cell phone in their hand. And whether you're a gamer or not a gamer, the likelihood of the number of times that you've looked at your computer or your phone just in the last hour is significant. And so whether you realize it or not, you are living a digital life as well. You just quite haven't surrendered yourself to admit it in some form or fashion.
Well, most people in church leadership are frustrated with the idea because it's A, confusing, and it's B, overwhelming. Their experience with social media is what they understand about digital, and so they're frustrated by it mostly. When they think about what our church's digital strategy is, they think of platform rather than relationship. That's the next ideological shift that needs to happen. And so because you think of platform first, you immediately start flashing to large scale pastors who have huge platforms. You're like, I don't know how to develop that, and B, even if I did know how to develop it, I literally do not want to develop it. And I'm all for that. I'm like, yeah, yep, absolutely, totally understand that. I don't want to develop it either. But every skill set that you've developed as a pastor in ministry is just as applicable to digital space as it is to physical space. The conversations that you can have with a person and the way that you can disciple them over a Zoom call does not change just because you can't sit with them at a coffee shop. And so if you shift your mindset from platform-based ministry online back to what it should be, because it's what you started your physical church with to begin with, which is relationship-based ministry and meeting people where they are and hearing their stories, you can unleash the power of what digital space actually means for you and what it means for discipleship. And it also is no longer out of reach. And I know Michael would echo this because Cornerstone Church, that's their heartbeat, right? They're in VR, not because they're trying to build a platform for themselves. They're not trying to promote Cornerstone Church's brand. They're literally meeting people exactly where they are. They know their names, their stories, their spiritual stories, their hangups, their hurts, their countries of origin, all of that stuff, right? They know, and Michael and I could just sit here for literally the next 2 hours and just tell you story after story after story after story.
Well, I know, Michael, I'm going to let you talk about the multiplication piece in just a second, but I want to mention the untapped potential of the next generations in the context of the church leaders who are listening right now, who will feel comfortable in these spaces and places that we're talking about and are longing to have a purpose in their life. They're longing to be used by God. They want to make a difference. But they want to do it. I mean, just like these guys were talking, right? Like, I don't quite fit the box. And how does this passion line up with my calling? I can only imagine the droves of people who are asking that question even right now in younger generations and don't quite see a place where they fit when it comes to living out their missional call or being the priesthood of all believers, right? Which is, our goal. And so I just want to mention that because I just feel that that's important when we talk about multiplication, that the way that the church will continue to multiply is through individuals building relationships and making disciples. And the younger generation, like Mark mentioned, is doing that in an online context. And so that's where their relationships are. That's where their friendships are being birthed and being nurtured. And that will be the place where they will feel the most comfortable sharing Jesus. But if we're not telling them that that's a great place to do it, and we're not equipping them to do it, and we're not encouraging them to do it, and we're not commissioning them to go and make disciples in the digital context, they might not ever consider it. And so I'm just throwing that out there. Michael, talk about multiplication for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to some of the things that Mark said, one thing is, and again, for any leader that's thinking about, and I'll just say the metaverse because that's the kind of term we use, but we're all talking about digital ministry. One misconception is that it's like some extension or some larger form of live stream. And Mark touched on this, and Carrie, you did as well. People are not looking for content. It's not live stream. They are looking for relationship, and we've seen churches come in and we've loved it. I mean, we've helped churches enter the space who said, "Hey, we want to do this. How can we do it?" We spend time with them, but they come in thinking, "Okay, this is just another spot to show video." And to Mark's point, Carrie, to your point as well, that is not the way this goes. It is to build relationship, not just to give content. Another thing Mark said that I would push back on. Mark said that our ministries are different in the sense of, with the 3D versus 2D, and in one sense that's true, but really we're still doing the same thing, because at the end of every device is a soul. And so we can have all of the bells and whistles, all the goofy avatars, the amazing worlds, we get all of that. Or it could just be, on Discord with a chat or whatever it is. At the bottom line is, it's at the other end of that device is a soul. That's the point. And why I say that is, anyone who's thinking about where their ministry might fit into the digital space, there's plenty of room in VR. If that's where you're interested, call me, DM me. I will get you into VR. It's not hard to get into VR. But it doesn't have to be what anyone else is doing. There is an infinite number of ways that churches can take the passion that they have. And you listen to the way that Mark talks about games. If there is a digital expression that someone is passionate about in a church, you can turn that into a ministry, because at the other end of whoever you're engaging with, those are the souls you're looking for. So I would just kind of say that as far as, as people are thinking about, as churches are thinking about, what can we do? It doesn't have to look like what everyone else is doing. In fact, I would urge you to consider, what's the thing you're passionate about? In terms of multiplication, that is the model that we have, and we take very, very seriously, some of the terms that we'll throw around, the phrases we'll throw around. The harvest is plenty and the workers are few. Man, especially in VR, but I know everywhere, but in VR, we feel that so deeply, because there are so many things we would like to do. Every Monday we have our volunteer team meeting, and there are so many great ideas that are like, hey, there's this group over here, there's this, that, we could do this app, this app. And we're just like, yeah, who's going to lead it? Like, how are we going to do it? And so we feel that so deeply. But then also we take very seriously, Pastor Jason and I especially take very seriously the role of the pastor, which is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. And what I have seen in the metaverse in terms of multiplication is the multiplication of leaders. In no other ministry have I seen leaders get, like, just God raise up leaders, true, genuine, like mature leaders, at such a rate, and a rate in terms of number, but also rate in terms of maturity. Like, there have been genuine times where we're, again, Pastor Jason and I will stop and say, are we laying hands too quickly? But we look at them and it's like, no, God has blessed them with maturity. Let's go. And we see men and women who are pouring themselves out in our ministry. And I step back, and it's a blessing. And also I'm in awe of it, because I I go into my meetings and I look at what the men and women who are volunteering their time, they're not on staff, they're not getting paid, putting way more time into it than I am. And it's just, they're just pouring their heart out because they see the beauty of advancing the gospel in that way. So what I've seen in terms of multiplication and the opportunities for churches, and as we talk about the physical church, I know Mark feels this as well, as I look at the physical church and I say, hey, we could do this so much better. It's out of love for the church. It's out of love, but we bring this and we say, listen, we have learned such valuable lessons. We've got some room to innovate here that a big brick and mortar church might not feel like they can take that kind of risk. And I get it. I was the finance guy at a big church before this. I get the risk of taking, doing things that might, kind of take us off the path a little bit. We're able to just, take some risks, see what works, see what doesn't. Our failures aren't failures. It's learning. And so I know for Mark and I and other guys who are in the space, we will talk and say, man, if the physical church could just see the value of what we've learned here, we know it would be blessed by it. The Q&A at the end, Mark, how many times has the Q&A yielded so much more fruit than whatever teaching time? I know for me, the Q&A at the end of our VR chat sessions, obviously we prioritize the preaching of the word. We make sure that we have it, but a lot of the time it's like we get to the Q&A and that's when the real ministry begins. And that's something that if you can you imagine going into a physical church and saying, give microphones to your people and just let them talk, let them ask questions. I've talked to pastors about this. They're like, we could never do that. And I'm like, yeah, you could. It's just scary. So, so anyway, I know there's a little bit of a detour from your question, but multiplication in terms of our church, I can tell you that I love that we want to see more people come in, and we have seen that. For our VR chat campus, we're pushing the limit. 80 is the limit on a Sunday. You can't get more than 80 people in a VR room. And we're routinely pushing that every week. And we started out with 12 people a couple of years ago. So from that, it's great, but it wasn't just packing people in. It was like relationship after relationship, sort of building that. And so I love that there is a little bit of the limitation of the technology, at least in VR, where it forces us to ask, okay, we want multiplication, but what are we multiplying?
Yeah.
And so that's one thing that I do love about the VR space.
There's actually a brick and mortar church that I know that's taken a similar kind of approach, that we said, this is as large of assembly place we're going to have. And when we get to fill this, we're planting another church. And so it's forcing you to think out. I would also argue that you guys are in the area of multiplication by helping brick and mortar churches move into the digital space as well. Maybe Mark, if you want to talk a little bit about how you see that happening in just some of the churches that you're helping. Are you seeing more and more churches beginning to embrace this? Because the way we're talking here, this really it's not an option to not be involved in the metaverse. We don't, if we're serious about reaching people, it's not an option not to be involved. And so yeah, go ahead.
I would say for me, it's not an option to not learn how to be hybrid and live in both spaces. I think that some of the things that I've learned from being a digitally exclusive planter is the importance of the physical church, and then the importance of the physical church learning a couple of the things that we've had the opportunity to learn because of our just unique circumstances. And so I've worked with a lot of churches, and most churches sort of come to me and like, hey, we have our live stream nailed, like it's down. And I'm like, great, it doesn't matter. It literally makes no difference. Like your live stream is quite frankly, it's probably just destroying your ability to engage with people. We've learned a lot of things. Like if you're going to plant another site, great, you can do it through a live stream to another site, and it will probably work. If you're going to plant an online site, an online campus, then do not plant it with a video call. You need a live preacher who is separate and dedicated to it. Otherwise, it is probably not going to flourish. You may have a lot of people who will come and consume, and then you will be upset because people are consumeristic and they won't serve and they won't give and they won't step up. And that's because you're taking the most consumeristic product that you make and you're making only that available to people. And people are well aware of the fact that you're not there for them. So yes, if you make consumeristic products, you will get consumeristic people. And so I think some of the main shifts for the physical church to take, and why this is important for them when it comes to thinking about multiplication and then just growth in general, is the recognition that that's where most people want to engage with you first anyway. Also, just like the growing number of people who are dealing with high levels of anxiety, the growing number of people who are neurodivergent, the growing number of people who are on the autism spectrum inside of our culture, they do not want to come to your church, quite frankly. They actually want a place where they can engage with over text and can form their thoughts before you suss them out as being on the spectrum. They want to have a chance to build a relationship with you before you can figure that out. And so finding places where you can genuinely engage and build relationships with people, finding ways for your senior I've given a lot of guidance, and I don't think we're in this to get like into the really practical nitty gritty of like some things that you as a physical church should do that are different. The thing that you primarily should do is you should sit down with your team. And I think you should say to yourself, okay, what are we doing online? And what is positioned to getting people in relationship with us and with each other? And if we're doing something online that is not positioned well to do that and doesn't have a clear indication to lead to relationship, then we should can it. And for most churches, that means you're not doing a live stream on Sunday morning. Now, if you don't want to do an online ministry and you just want to provide a good and services model, and it's just like another amenity that you offer for people who are at camp that weekend or on vacation or can't make it because they're sick or they're shut-ins, fine. Put a camera in the back of the room. Don't worry about it. You don't even have to have it look all that great. People just want to feel like they're there because they're already part of the family. They already are established relationship with you. If you want to really make disciples that can't get to your building physically and you want to connect with people deeply, then you gotta sit down and go back to the drawing board, get rid of the platform-based first mindset, and you got to get to the relationship-based first mindset.
So good. Okay, so I feel like we could continue this conversation on for a few hours, if not more, which again is why in 2025, it will be an entire year length of conversation that we will be doing a deep dive around with Mark and guests like Michael and others who will be joining us along the way. But this has been a great conversation. And as we mentioned, none of us are immune to digital presence in our lives. And so it's definitely something that we should all be considering, praying, listening to the Holy Spirit on what's our role, what's our part, what's our approach. Michael and Mark, man, I really appreciate the work that you guys do. I know I can only imagine kind of the obstacles that you've faced along the way, and even maybe some naysayers and some, hate mail here or there, possibly. I don't know, hopefully not, but I just appreciate you just sticking with it and blazing a trail for other people to follow in order to spread the gospel and multiply making disciples in the church around the world and in the United States. Bill, you have anything else?
Yeah, I just want to thank you as well, guys. And for those of you that are listening, we'll have links that will be connected to this. So if you want to contact these guys, you'll be able to do that. But yeah, Mark and Michael, thank you so much for what you're doing and how you're pressing into, really reaching people in places that, that we've just not even conceived of in some ways. And Carrie, thank you for your leadership for Exponential Next and for what you're doing on pushing the edges of multiplication. And thank you all for listening in and being with us for another episode of this 7-part video and podcast series. So I'm taking a deeper look at multiplication. So I invite you to look at those other 6 as well. And as we continue to explore just opportunities for the future of multiplication for the church. But thank you, guys. Carrie.
Thanks for having us.